Yenga tvarangri sharana bhavata kataya. Kirtanya tirtha yashasa kushala rasagyaha. Others, please.
Darpita bhayam dhruva unnayaste. Gat padam visharada bhavataha kathayaha. Tanyatita yashasa kushala rasatnyaha.
Natyantikam viganayantyapite prasadam. Kim vanyadarpita vayam ruva unnayaste. Engatvaram visarana bhavata kataya. Kirtanya tirtha yasasa kusala rasagya.
Natyantikam viganayantyapite prasadam. Kim vanyadarpita vayam ruva unnayaste. Yengatvaram visarana bhavata kataya. Kirtanya tirtha yasaha kushala rasanya.
Synonyms. Na, not. Atyantikam, liberation. Viganayanti, care for. Api, even. Te, those. Prasadam, benedictions. Kim u, what to speak. Anyat, other material happinesses. Arpita, sorry, that just caught my eye. Given. Bhayam, fearfulness. Bhruva, of the eyebrows. Unnayai, by the raising. Te, your. Yea, those devotees. Anga, O Supreme Personality of Godhead. Tvat, your. Angri, lotus feet. Sharanaha, who have taken shelter. Bhavataha, your. Kataya, narrations. Kirtanya, worth chanting. Tirtha, pure. Yashasaha, glories. Kushalaha, very expert. Rasagyaha, knowers of the mellows or humors. Translation. Persons who are very expert and most intelligent in understanding things as they are, engage in hearing narrations of the auspicious activities and pastimes of the Lord, which are worth chanting and worth hearing. Such persons do not even care for the highest material benediction, namely liberation, to say nothing of other less important benedictions like the material happiness of the heavenly kingdom. Responsively, please. Persons who are very expert and most intelligent in understanding things as they are. Engage in hearing narrations of the auspicious activities and pastimes of the Lord, which are worth chanting and worth hearing. Persons do not care. Thank you. Such persons do not care. Even for the highest material benediction. Namely, liberation. To say nothing of other less important benedictions. Like the material happiness of the heavenly kingdom. I particularly like this phrase, which are worth chanting and worth hearing. And it reminds me of, one of my favorite sentences in the English language. It's a sentence from the beginning of one of the chapters of a children's novel called Stuart Little by E.B. White. And it starts out something like, in this loveliest town where and then it's just like this amazing kind of like cinematic look at the town, you know, and the mountain, the hills are, it's just like everything gets better and better. And then it says something about the backyards, which are worth exploring, something like that. And I just always like that part of the sentence. And it builds and builds and builds. In this loveliest of all towns, Stuart stopped for a sarsaparilla. It just kind of ends like, Stuart stopped to have a soda. But it's this beautiful, it's this wonderful description of this town, of this little, whatever this little town is. So I like this, worth hearing, worth chanting and worth hearing. We're going to talk about that. Srila Prabhupada's purport. The transcendental bliss enjoyed by the devotees of the Lord is completely different from the material happiness enjoyed by less intelligent persons. The less intelligent persons in the material world are engaged by the four principles of benediction called dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Generally, they prefer to take to religious life to achieve some material benediction, the purpose of which is to satisfy the senses. When, by that process, they become confused or frustrated in fulfilling the maximum amount of sense enjoyment, they try to become one with the Supreme, which is, according to their conception, mukti, or liberation. There are 5 kinds of liberation, the least important of which is sayujya, to become one with the Supreme. Devotees don't care for such liberation because they are actually intelligent. Nor are they inclined to accept any of the other 4 kinds of liberation, namely, to live on the same planet as the Lord, to live with him side by side as an associate, to have the same opulence and to attain the same bodily features. They're concerned only with glorifying the Supreme Lord and his auspicious activities. Pure devotional service is Shravanam Kirtanam. Pure devotees who take transcendental pleasure in hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord do not care for any kind of liberation. Even if they are offered the 5 liberations, they refuse to accept them, as stated in the Bhagavatam in the 3rd Canto. Materialistic persons aspire for the sense enjoyment of heavenly pleasure in the heavenly kingdom, but devotees reject such material pleasure at once. The devotees do not even care for the post of Indra. A devotee knows that any pleasurable material position is subject to be annihilated at a certain point. You're always going to be fired, somehow or other, right? You're going to lose your position somehow. If you get a nice position, and then something happens, things don't work out, and, well, maybe you stay there for the rest of your life and you just die. It's one way of getting fired. Or you get laid off, or something happens. this happened to me. I had what I thought was a very nice position, tenure track position at Hawaii Community College, and when it came time to decide whether I was going to get tenure, my department chair managed to arrange things so that I did not, which meant I had to go, and well, here I am, in a better position, I guess. A devotee is never interested in such temporary pleasure. From Vedic scriptures, it is understood that sometimes even Brahma and Indra fall down. But a devotee in the transcendental abode of the Lord never falls. This transcendental stage of life in which one feels transcendental pleasure in hearing the Lord's pastimes is also recommended by Lord Chaitanya. When Lord Chaitanya was talking with Ramananda Roy, there were various suggestions offered by Ramananda regarding spiritual realization, but Lord Chaitanya rejected all but one, that one should hear the glories of the Lord in association with pure devotees. That is acceptable for everyone, especially in this age. One should engage himself in hearing from pure devotees about the activities of the Lord. That is considered the supreme benediction for mankind. Om Ajnanatimidandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukhaṁ Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langhayate Girim Jatkripa Tamaham Bande Shri Gurun Dinataram Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripasindhobhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Natyantikam Viganayantyapite Prasadam Kim Vanyad Arpita Bhayam Dhruva Unnayaiste Yengatvarangri Sharana Bhavatakatayaha Kirtanya Kirta Yashasa Kushala Rasagniha. Persons who are very expert and most intelligent in understanding things as they are engage in hearing narrations of the auspicious activities and pastimes of the Lord which are worth chanting and worth hearing. Such persons do not care, even for the highest material benediction, namely liberation, to say nothing of other less important benedictions like the material happiness of the heavenly kingdom. This verse is just, it's too much again. I've had a very emotionally interesting morning. I'm feeling terror, gratitude, emptiness, fullness, just being overwhelmed generally by so many things connected to my life, my spiritual life, which is pretty much all there is anymore. But and this verse was just a big part of it. It's too much. I really liked it in the word to word. Srila Prabhupada gives anyat as other material happinesses, plural. That caught my eye for a moment, and I like that. Kirtanya, I stopped to highlight that in the word for word as well. Worth chanting. These narrations are worth hearing, and worth chanting, worth sharing with others, worth giving our time to. And everything else is, well, I think I mentioned it the other day, and probably the time before that. Narada Muni describes, compared to Srimad Bhagavatam, everything else, including discussion of dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, the four goals of human life. The purusharthas, the things for which everybody, at least one of which everybody's striving with all our energy. Gaining virtue, so that we, as Srila Prabhupada points out in his purport, so we can get ahead in the world, artha, so we can get some gain. And why do we want to get ahead in the world? Why do we want wealth? So we can enjoy kama. And when we realize that that's all a big scam, then moksha. Then we want out. These are all, Prabhupada says in this purport, these are all different forms of sense gratification. They're referred to in the second verses, we'll see, of the Bhagavatam as cheating, or cheating dharma, kaitava dharma. Why? Once again, because they're about me. It's about my virtue, my being seen for being virtuous, about my getting ahead in the world, my enjoying, and my freedom. They're all self-centered. So they're all cheating religion. They're not real love. Love means giving. When we love somebody, we give ourselves to that person. And the more deeply we love, the more unreservedly we give. We become completely vulnerable to them. Give whatever we have. Ultimately, we have to give our heart. And what do they say? What do you give to the man who has everything? Krishna's the guy who has everything, right? What's the one thing he doesn't have? My heart. Because I'm reserving that, I'm keeping that. I guard it very carefully. We draw these lines in the sand, as we were discussing yesterday. Krishna and I were talking about this yesterday, these lines in the sand. Who was she talking to? Oh, she was talking to Radha Rupini on the phone while we were arranging the car to go out down to the park for some kirtan. And she was talking about, we don't like these lines in the sand. We just step over them. And I said, or we just kind of like rub them out, we erase them. And we neglect them, ignore them. So we build all these things. There's a part of us that's traditional Chinese medicine refers to as the heart protector. And I had my attention called to that once by one of my acupuncturists. And she did some cupping. There was a mark that was left a week later on my back in the area that would indicate a problem with my heart protector. I don't know if it's a meridian or area or something around. She says, watch for boundary issues. So we protect ourselves. I keep my heart very carefully protected, locked in a really the best safe I can get, so nobody can hurt me. But when we love, just give. Take me. I had a friend tell me recently, it makes you feel better to hurt me, go for it. That's why I'm here. That is love. And so this is what the Bhagavatam teaches. The Bhagavatam teaches love. Make yourself completely vulnerable to Krishna. He can kick me around, he can abandon me, he can whatever. He's completely free to do anything and everything. Still, in every circumstance, he's my worshipful Lord unconditionally. It's the ultimate trust fall, right? We just want. When we know someone and they gain our trust, then we naturally give ourselves. We can't help it. So here, the Bhagavatam is telling us, and these are the four Kumaras, right? These are the four Kumaras, and what has just happened to them? What have they just experienced? They've just seen Narayana face to face. These are guys completely situated in Atmarama, in enjoying the life of the soul in a kind of nondescript, indistinct way. They're just grooving on being spiritual entities without much sense of what that's really about. Shantarasa. And somehow or other they got this desire to come to Vaikuntha. They had this encounter with the gatekeepers of Vaikuntha, and to resolve everything, who came but Narayana himself, on his own 2 feet, accompanied by the goddess of fortune. Why the goddess of fortune? Radhesha mentioned it yesterday, I mentioned it last week. Just to blow the Kumaras' minds. Just so they could actually have direct experience of Krishna's Svarupa Shakti, of Bhakti Devi herself, the most powerful force, completely breaking down their sense of being liberated. Now all they want is to hear about Narayan, Lakshmi Narayan. Because these are things worth hearing. And everything else, as Narada Muni mentioned, is by comparison, including dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, jugupsitam. Detestable. Just by comparison. They're not all completely, but if you put them on a scale. So, here we go again. Including liberation. So, how did I have this organized in my mind earlier? Okay, so, then let's take a quick look at something about liberation in comparison with bhakti. And where do we find that? That's discussed early in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and the Nectar of Devotion. One of the 6 qualities that of bhakti that manifest as we progress in our devotion is moksha lugatakrit. Moksha lugatakrit. Moksha is liberation. Laghu, I have a note here. Laghuta means smallness, littleness, meanness, insignificance, lightness, disregard. So even liberation, the highest of all the kinds of happiness, of self-centered happiness, becomes lightweight compared to bhakti. Insignificant. Don't care for it. What did Prabhupada say? We don't care a fig, the devotees don't care a fig for that. They don't give a damn about it. Liberation. Liberation, shmiberation. So, in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Rupa Goswami says, bhakti causes a total disregard for liberation. When even a little attraction for the Lord, we were talking yesterday about a little mercy, right? Just a little mercy. When even a little attraction for the Lord grows in the heart, the 4 objects of human attainment, artha, dharma, kama, and moksha, become like grass, shameful to appear before bhakti. And Jiva Goswami says, the word prarudha, grows but is not born, is used to indicate that bhakti is not produced from something else, that it is self-manifesting. Bhaktya sanjataya bhaktya. This is one of the posts that I found, right? Bhakti comes from bhakti. The goals of human endeavor, artha, dharma, kama, and moksha, become like grass. That means that they feel ashamed to appear before bhakti. Now, Srila Prabhupada discusses this in the Nectar of Devotion, the corresponding section of the Nectar of Devotion, at a little more length. So I want to read a little bit of that chapter. Maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs, because then I want to take a look a little bit of a look at the 2nd verse of the Bhagavatam, where this is brought to light. And then the last verse to kind of wrap things up. Last few verses of the Bhagavatam. So Srila Prabhupada writes in the Nectar of Devotion, how much a devotee is seriously attached to the devotional service of the Supreme Personality can be understood from the statement of Maharaj Prithu, which is described in Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th Canto. My dear Lord, if after taking liberation I have no chance of hearing the glories of your Lordship, glories chanted by pure devotees from the core of their hearts in praise of your lotus feet, if I have no chance for this honey of transcendental bliss, then I shall never ask for liberation, or this so-called spiritual emancipation. So-called spiritual emancipation. I shall simply always pray unto your Lordship that you may give me millions of tongues and millions of ears, so that I can constantly chant and hear of your transcendental glories. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I could read the whole chapter, but I suggest this chapter 4 of Nectar of Devotion. Our honeybees know about this. We've discussed this. We have a little Nectar of Devotion group that meets once a week. Where did I want to go next? Back to the Bhagavatam. So as far as these Purusharthas are concerned, we see them dismissed right at the very beginning of the Bhagavatam. The first verse of the Bhagavatam, oh, no, I want to go back to the first verse. Well, first I want to do the second verse of the Bhagavatam. Then I want to do the first verse and tie it up with the end of the Bhagavatam, show you how something works in the Bhagavatam. So I set my hearing aids on normal, and bells and kartals are really loud. That's why I have a special setting for kirtan, and I didn't expect that. So the second verse says, Dharma prochita kaitavotra paramo nirmatsaranam satam vedyam vastavamataravastu shivadam tapatrayon mulanam Srimad Bhagavate Mahamunikrute Kingva Parayadishvaraha Sadyo Hridyavarudyate Trakritipi Sushushivis Takshanat. Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, this Bhagavad Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. Why? No envy, no self-interest. Therefore, they're fully pure in heart. My life's not about me. My life's about him and you and them and everyone else. And that fulfills me. Those people are, these are the kind of people we want to associate with. The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Boom! Where are you going to find that? Where else are you going to find a literature that makes that claim? You'll find something that make all kinds of claims about how it's interesting, what kind of benefits you might get from it, but the highest reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. Well, where is that? Tapatrayon mulanam. Pulls them out by the root. By the root, their cause, right? Where do they come from? So the Bhagavatam goes right there, just rips out the root. We can cut those damn daffodil and tulip trees down as much as we want, but those suckers are going to keep coming back, unless somehow or other we can get down there and get that whole root system out. Bhagavatam does this to our selfishness. This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. What is the need of any other scripture? As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within his heart. I'm just going to read the first paragraph of Srila Prabhupada's purport because I have a couple of other things I want to share today too. Prabhupada writes, the religion includes four primary subjects, namely pious activities, economic development, satisfaction of the senses, and finally liberation from material bondage. Irreligious life is a barbarous condition. Indeed, human life begins when religion begins. Eating, sleeping, fearing, and mating are the four principles of animal life. These are common to both to animals and human beings, but religion is the extra function of the human being. Without religion, human life is no better than animal life. Therefore, in human societies, there is some form of religion which aims at self-realization and which makes reference to man's eternal relationship with God. No, I'm not going to do that. Okay, so then I want to go back. This is much easier with a paper book, at least for old people like me. Okay, so the first verse of the Bhagavatam, the second verse is the Vastu Nirdesha Shloka. This tells us the scope of what the Bhagavatam is going to address, and it also, by the way, tells us the most suitable audience for the Bhagavatam, the people who will most be able to appreciate it. The first verse says, Janmadyasya yaton vairitaras-charteshu avigyaswarat tene Brahma Hridaya adikavaye muhyanti yatsurayaha. I'm doing the Sanskrit because I'm tying this in to the end of the Bhagavatam. Tejo vari mridam yata vinimayo yatra trisargo mrisha dhamna svena sada nirastakuhakam satyam param dhimahi. Satyam param dhimahi. Remember that. And this is offering obeisances to the Supreme. This is establishing that Krishna is the supreme cause of all causes. He is the cause not just of creation, but also of sustenance and destruction of the cosmos. He's the cause of the causes of everything. So he is the absolute truth. I meditate on him because he is the absolute truth. Satyam param dhimahi. Now at the end of the Bhagavatam, in the last chapter, and this is how we really get a sense of what the Bhagavatam's about. It's stated at the beginning and at the end. I used to teach reading at several different levels, beginning with kids who were about to start kindergarten, all the way up to speed reading and comprehension for adults, and I had students with PhDs and stuff. And one of the things that we would tell them was about reading nonfiction prose is take a look at the title, take a look at the title page, you take a look at the back of the title page, take a look at the table of contents, take a look at the beginning of the book, take a look at the end of the book. And then you go through each chapter and you kind of like build a skeleton, a framework of the book. And on that, when you read the book, and then you might take a look at the index as well. Just scan the index to kind of see just what kind of things are discussed in the book. And then as you read the book, having built that kind of skeletal frame, then all these details become hung on this. There are points of reference for them. And they all kind of make sense, they fall into place. So we see Satyam Param Dhimahi at the very beginning. This is a book about the absolute truth, who is the fit object for our meditation. And then the last verse, we're getting to, this is the 19th verse that it goes on. It also ends, Satyam Param Dhimahi, talking about the absolute truth. And I'm just going to fast forward to the very last verse, as I have a few times in the last couple of weeks, because it really brings home the point of today's verse being spoken by these four sages. That we've got something worth talking about, something worth hearing about. What's that old Bonnie Raitt song? Let's give them something to talk about. Talking about love, right? This is real love. This is really something to talk about. So the Bhagavatam ends like this. So it's framed like this. We're going to meditate on the absolute truth. And here's a little something about that absolute truth, who is Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the cause of the causes of everything. So, Nama Sankirtanam Yasya Sarva Papa Pranashanam Pranamo Dukkha Samanas Tam Namami Harim Param. I offer my respectful obeisances to the Supreme Lord Hari, the congregational chanting of whose holy names destroys all sinful reactions, and the offering of obeisances unto whom relieves all suffering. What else is there? I mean, there's lots of stuff. But if we were to compare things, then, if we were to put everything else, got to take one of those old-fashioned scales, balance scales, right? There was, when we used to watch the Mahabharata on the International Channel back in the 90s, when we lived in San Diego, they would have these commercials for these Indian products, and one was some kind of basmati rice. I don't remember what the brand was. And they would take a king and put him on one side of the scale, and they would take like maybe a 10-pound bag of this basmati rice, and the king would go, boing, something like that. So if you took everything else we can conceive of on one side of the scale, and the subject matter of the Bhagavatam on the other side of the scale would be bam! The Bhagavatam side would just sink to the ground, and the other one thing would go flipping off like a little kid off of teeter-totter or something, when his big brother jumps on it and goes flying. Lightweight, moksha lagutakrit, makes even liberation seem lightweight. So this is what the four Kumars are realizing after having seen Narayana and Lakshmi, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and his internal pleasure potency. Bhakti Devi herself. I'll stop there, already being in trouble. Quick questions or comments? Adideva Prabhu?
It mentions about the 5 different kind of liberations. Right, it's in the purport, nor are they, the devotees are not inclined to accept any of these liberations. My question is, because as devotees we also, one of the liberation is to go and live on the same planet as the Lord. So why would we reject it? And that's what when we say come back to God.
Because it's about us. We don't want Krishna, we want Krishna's service. That's the goal. That's what we learn from the Bhagavatam. Now, if we have to, if it's required to serve Krishna, to go live on the same planet as Krishna, have a form like Krishna's or whatever, then the devotees may accept it. The Vaikuntha-vasis certainly do. They live in the Vaikuntha Loka, they have forms that look just like Lakshmi's or Narayan's, right? But the goal of bhakti is bhakti. It's not moksha. It's not even the devotional-ish forms of liberation. It's service. It's that giving. Just give it. Take my heart. Janis Joplin. Take a little piece of my heart. You know you got it if it makes you feel good.
Are fearing and defending interchangeable?
Yes. Yeah. And Srila Prabhupada sometimes uses that. He sometimes uses them when he talks about those 4 animal propensities: eating, sleeping, mating, and fearing, or eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. Again, it's about protecting what I have. Sometimes you see people when they're eating, they're like looking around, like especially birds. You see the birds eating, they're looking around to see if anybody else is going to get this crumb of Vishwambar's bread, or the bread that Kavi just threw out in the backyard or something. So, yeah. And this today's verse actually addresses that, right? I think fear is in there. That we're able to give up all fearfulness, by having seen the movement of the Lord's eyebrows, I think is the way it's put in the word for word. Thank you. Good one. Stephen?
Yes. The translation will talk about the 5 liberation.
Mm-hmm.
And my question is just how the rejection, how they refuse that 5 liberation. That's happened when they die and Krishna come to them and ask if they want liberation, or that's happening daily when you choose to worship in the personal form of Krishna or the personal form. How does this choice happen?
Well, it happens because that's where our heart is, right? Yung bhapi smaram bhavam tajantyante kalevaram. Whatever our consciousness is focused on at the end of our lives, we attain that in our next life.
So the choice is more natural. You're natural.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if our heart has been trained to love and serve Krishna, then that's what we get. If it's been trained to live on a planet where Narayana lives, then we might attain that. But the devotees, especially following Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and Vallabhacharya as well. We see in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and Nectar of Devotion, especially in the 2nd chapter that describes sadhana bhakti. When we talk about Vaidhi sadhana bhakti, we get to the end of that discussion. Rupa Goswami says, and other people, they call this Vaidhi sadhana bhakti, they call this Maryada bhakti. It's respectful bhakti. And you get to the end the very end of the chapter, after having discussed Raganuga bhakti, which Srila Prabhupada refers to generally as spontaneous devotional service, he says, and there are other people who call this pushti. So he's talking about Vallabhacharya's followers. So they're also they're also Braja Bhaktas. They aspire to serve Krishna in Vrindavan. And that's about service. Whatever it is Krishna wants me to do, that's what I'll do. And if that means doing it here, that's cool too. Chagopal?
I was just wondering, when one attains becoming one with God, that Sayuja liberation, does one have to be have realization of the Paramatma in order to get liberated? Could one just...
No. It's Brahman. There are three aspects that are presented. Three aspects of the Godhead that are presented in the Bhagavatam. We know this, right? You know what they are?
Brahman, Paramatma, and
Bhagavan.
okay.
Brahmeti Paramatmeti Bhagavaniti Shabdite. We discussed three things here. Brahma, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Actually, here we're going to discuss Bhagavan. But we can discuss Paramatma and Brahman in the context of growing our appreciation for Bhagavan. So Brahma realization is just a realization of spiritual beingness without a sense of even individuality. Supersoul, meditating on the supersoul means there's me and the supersoul. So that's a completely different level. That's for the yogis. The jnanis, they aspire for Brahman realization. And now there's, as Radhesha was pointing out, there's good Brahman realization and bad Brahman realization. Right? There's Brahmavad and Mayavad. And the Mayavad means they're so invested in this non-differentiation that anything that suggests that it's distinct from anything else, that's just Maya, including the beautiful form of the personality of God, the transcendental activities of the personality of Godhead. They're Maya. That's why we call them Mayavadins. The Brahmavadins, they're living in Brahman. But they can be converted by association with devotees. In the Mayavadins world, there's no opportunity for association. Almost zero opportunity for association with devotees. But the Brahmavadis, like Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, Shukadev Goswami, the four Kumars, by the association of devotees, then their hearts can be changed.
So once you have Paramatma realization, you kind of qualify you for the other types of liberation, like the same planet, or
No, you get those. No, well, maybe, yeah, maybe. But that's not our goal.
Yeah.
That's not what's taught here. Is that okay? Thank you so much for your patience. Grantaraja Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki